And I said, baby, you can do what you want because you put the cream in Scream. Oh, hi there. Sorry about that. Didn't see ya. How's it going? Welcome back to another Cold Blood and Cocktails. As you beautiful people know, any tiff you may have, please cast it away because this is a channel of positive energy. Okay? Thank you. Oh, my nasty little nightmares. How you doing today? I hope wherever you're at in the world, you're having a great day so far. I myself am doing wonderful. This hood is going to be the death of me. No pun intended. But it is the perfect time for this. It's once again storming outside. I love me a good rain shower. Said rain shower, not golden shower. But also, if you see my makeup start to fade, it is 100% lipstick. I'm very limited with my makeup that I brought here, so we work with what we have. Cheers to you. Okay, we need a straw. Anyways, today's story was actually the inspiration for the ever so popular hit slasher series Scream. Surely you've heard of it. I really don't think Hollywood could quite depict just how gruesome and sad the actual cases were. Like, the dude behind these stories was a fucked up Fred for sure. So let's just hop into this bullfuckery, shall we? Hold on, I need to grab a pillow for my back. She's getting old. Shit, I wiped part of my face off. Oh, damn it. You know what? We'll just add a little black contour there. How about that? It's like it never happened. Only all of life's problems were that easy to fix. Oh, shit. Does not look like contour. It looks like I got run over. You know what? It's fine. Anyways, let's take it back to August of 1990, the year before yours truly was born. And actually about 2 hours from me right now in Orlando, in Gainesville, Florida. The summer was coming to a close. College classes would be starting back up, and fraternities were itching to get back into their yearly, totally not gay hazing. Is that still a thing? I don't know. I was too busy in the theater. I know, shocking. Anyways, life was good for most people, but we aren't here to tell a story about most people, are we, folks? Hell to the no, ma'am. Well, in late August, police get a routine call requesting that 2 college roommates be checked on. The parents of Christina and Sonia hadn't been able to reach their daughters for several days, and they're getting a little bit worried. Christina's car is parked just outside of their apartment, yet they aren't answering their doors or phones. And this was all before Sally Tellies. I know, you youngsters are like, gay gasp, that existed? It's hard to believe, I know. Yes, there was a time like that, and trust me, it was goddamn wonderful. Anyways, an officer shows up to their apartment and is knocking his ass off with no response, just like the parents. His spidey senses were tingling and doing their thing, and something didn't feel quite right. And it wasn't just the enchilada and big gulp Diet Coke that he had had for lunch. So he heaves the door open and starts searching, only to find Sonia's dead body lying there on the waterbed. We're coming in hot with this one, ladies and gents. Murder in the first 5 minutes, baby. Not good, queen. But in all seriousness, this was terrible. Sonia was 17 or 18. She was young. She was gentle. She wanted to be a nursery school teacher. She'd been sleeping when someone broke in and stabbed her like 20 fucking times. Like, what kind of ashtray licking psychopath does that shit? And cops could tell from the wounds all on her arms that she put up a fight. Like, she was really trying to defend herself, so she was pulled by her feet down to the end of the bed. And when she slid down, her arms went up, and that's when the attacker really went in and ended her life. Like, this was very gruesome. And then downstairs in the living room, they find the body of 17-year-old Christina, who also had been viciously attacked and sexually assaulted before being murdered. And if that wasn't sick enough, the killer mutilated her like he took her fucking nips. And before this twisted little bitch left, he staged the entire crime scene. He moved everything, did some cleaning, probably helped himself to a cup of instant coffee, then posed Christina's body in a very scandalous way. Like, if that doesn't scream mommy issues, I don't know what in the hell does. Investigators were like, fuck shit, fuck! They didn't know what to do because they were used to dealing with a random robbery or a drunk driver, never a mutilation, and rarely a murder. Also, I just realized it's really difficult to see when I show emotion. My god, it's like I've got Botox. Okay, this is surprised. This is my brows furrowed. Almost the exact same. Okay, well, we'll try our best with this. Anyways, the police people had an extra large load of shit in their pants because the medical examiner had actually seen a style very similar to this. And who might that be from? Why, a Mr. Ted Bundy. We all know him. But just like with Teddy, they didn't know how many lives the killer would take before they up and left. Well, less than 10 hours later, they'd find that this killer was just warming up. Another gal named Krista Hoyt never showed up to her midnight shift at the sheriff's department. She was young, she was only like 18 and was studying to become a crime lab tech. She was bright, vivacious, and was never late to a thing, so the fact that she was a no-call, no-show was very suspicious. Which, I think we have our first suspicious shot? I don't know. I mean, this whole fucking story's suspicious, but any reason to drink? Oh, and I smudged my mouth. How about that? Wouldn't be the first time either. Anyways, Krista, she lived in the middle of nowhere in a pretty secluded duplex, and the cops weren't even expecting her to be home, but when they entered, they all but pissed themselves. Krista's naked body had been propped up against the bed, and her head had been cut off and dramatically placed on the bookshelf right at eye level of the cops. As one could imagine, everyone was fucking horrified, especially the cops that found her. And then the medical examiners were like, what the fuck? Because they had realized that the body and head had been placed just like that for shock value. So they were like, clearly we have a theater queen on our hands. Oh shit. I said I was a theater queen, didn't I? I promise you, I'm not a killer. I am not a crook. Anyways, cops knew that they were obviously dealing with someone who, to get their murderous rocks off, liked to make a show and put on theatrics. Investigators thought maybe this is just a simple spree and the killer would hopefully be done after this. But hello, Hilda, that is not how serial killers work. You can't put that much effort in and just stop cold turkey. That's absurd. Killing is like crack for a serial killer. Well, the next morning, Gainesville was blibbering with fear because 3 college students had been murdered at different crime scenes in one night. Well, of course, this left parents really fucking scared because they were about to send their babies off to class while a psycho roamed the city. They already had empty nest syndrome, now had a killer on top of that? Fuck me. And to top this shit Sunday off with a chilling cherry, cops got a call about 2 more students, Manny and Tracy, whose friends couldn't find them. The 23-year-olds were homecoming king and queen and lifelong friends, but when cops arrived to their house, once again they saw a freaking massacre. The bed was soaked in blood after what must have been hours of torture. Poor Manny had multiple stab wounds all over him trying to save both himself and Tracy, but these murders proved that, Henny, it don't matter if you're a man or a woman, no one was safe. Like, Gainesville was used to a yearly murder rate in the single digits, so to have a sudden crime spree was like a snowstorm in the south, like the city shuts down and everyone panics. And with all of these deaths in a really short time, it created a sense that this shit was never gonna end. Like, what the fuck, would everyone have to move out of Gainesville so that only the killer was left? Students began flocking back to their hometowns and leaving Gainesville in fear of being hunted down, tortured, dismembered, and killed. I couldn't even imagine the fear. Like, the only thing I have to worry about is acid reflux creeping up on me. Like, this chill, kind of hippy-dippy town was transformed overnight into a ghost town filled with murderous energy. And the people who didn't want to leave town were creating army-style barricades around their homes with guns and armor. It's like these people were expecting the fucking apocalypse. And now there was a rumor going around town that the killer dressed like a pizza delivery guy, so literally all the pizza shops in town had to close till the fucker was caught. No pizza? That in itself is a travesty. What are we supposed to eat after smoking our doobies? Well, then the rumor was that he was a policeman and then a doctor, and by now people are like, this shit's ridiculous. Nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. Get your shit together, Nancy Drew. But this deep sense of fear was affecting everyone. There were even interviews of cops saying that they would try yoga, meditating, deep breathing exercises, anything to attempt to calm down because they were the ones who are supposed to be protecting the community. But a big voice in their head was yelling for them to get the fuck out of town. Like, can you blame them? Shit. Well, then the details of all the murders leaks out, and like usual, the media has a freaking field day. They label the killer as the Gainesville Ripper, and you know when they name a killer, this shit is serious. They tell people that he's a practiced and seasoned killer and might not even be from around here, but his signature was to display the dead body in a very lewd position as a message to the cops and community. His message was that he's the director and star of this show, walking in purse first, and the victims are his props, and the cops are merely actors on his set. I was gonna say this is like straight out of a horror movie, but it kind of is. Oh my gosh, just scary. Well, in walks CSI Detective Steve, who begins looking into the case and notices a pattern at all of the apartment locations. It seemed like all of the apartments had rear sliding glass door entries where the killer could watch and creep on his victims before attacking. There was also a very strict method of clothing removal, like the shirts were cut down the center with one swipe of scissors, almost like a gentle dance, but then the bras and underwear were viciously ripped away. It's like the killer was graceful in the beginning, but then so enthralled by what he was doing that he became a monster after the victim's shirt was off. Again, screaming mommy issues. The killer was also a clean fuck, like they would wash some of the bodies before leaving, and they made sure to wear gloves so that none of the towels or surfaces left any fingerprints. He'd basically be a merry maid before leaving the crime scene and do everything but put a mint on their pillows. Which, of course, there's nothing investigators hate more than a clean and savvy killer who knows how to get away with murder, because in just 3 days they had 5 dead bodies and absolutely no leads. At this rate, who's to say say there wouldn't be 20 bodies by next week. Like, this dude could kill the whole town before he was even caught. Well, then suddenly, as fast as a club clears out at 2 a.m., the killings just stopped, like dead ass stopped, literally. Ugh, god damn, that wasn't even intentional, I'm sorry. Cops were like, is this a fluke, or is he just giving us time to catch up and then he'll go on an even bigger killing spree? Or maybe this was just a really big string of burglaries that had gone very sickly awry. So they pull up the drawing board and start to string things together. They know all the victims were academic stars at either the University of Florida or Santa Fe Community College. None of them were even in the same program, but all of these crimes were clearly against young students. And the 4 women were oddly similar. They were all petite with long brown hair, so the killer must be picking and choosing his prey versus just killing at random. But then the number of stab wounds on the body really varied and had no pattern. The 4th victim had over 30 stab wounds, whereas the 3rd one only had 1. The medical examiner was like, well, I'm pretty sure the weapon was a Marine K-bar, a pretty cheap knife to get a hold of, and was most likely a solid 7 inches, giggity. But this shit was designed to kill, which yet again pointed towards the killer having some kind of experience. And it seemed like all of the victims had a weird sticky residue around their hands, which normally I would insert a profane joke, but have some class. But it turned out that the residue was from duct tape that the killer would bind the victims in before removing and leaving. And it was also found that Krista's blood had pooled in her back, meaning that she had laid dead for several hours before being moved and displayed for the cops to find her. So it was clear that whoever this killer was didn't really seem to be in a hurry like they would be with a robbery. This was an actual factual serial killer. All the victims had a back door that had been pried open. The killer had tormented the victims for several hours. They'd eventually kill them, let their body rest for another few hours, and then finally decapitate them. Yeah, damn. Stories just keep getting darker and darker. And though we can all admit that this killer was pretty damn clean, that didn't mean there wasn't an ass load of evidence. In fact, almost like 20,000 items were taken into evidence. Like, fuck me, that's a ton, isn't it? Imagine your job is to track all that and sort it and keep it in one place. I can't even keep my makeup brushes clean and organized. How the fuck could I do that? But this became a round-the-clock mission for the police to try and figure out who this was, and they were realizing that the most impactful evidence probably couldn't be seen with the naked eye. So they bring in the big guys to test for DNA and whatnot, and they found that there was actually traces of semen on Christina's panties, and there was also a little bit on Krista's body, too. Also, just in case it's confusing, Christina and Krista are 2 different people. Very similar names, though. But what do you know? This semen actually happens to be from the same man, but who the hell this man is, nobody knows. Like, that was the shitty thing about early era DNA. If they weren't in the system, they were still a mystery. Really, the best they could do was collect blood and DNA from suspects and try to match the results. But at this point, the suspect list was almost 700 names, which is the size of some towns. Like, that's a lot of people to have to sift through. So the team goes through all of the suspects and asks if they'll voluntarily give some hair. I guess that's easier than giving them a dirty mag and a cup for a pump and dump sample, but not as fun though. But one name stood out from everyone else, 18-year-old Edward Lewis Humphrey. He was a student. He was recently evicted from Manny and Tracy's apartment complex because he'd dress up in combat gear and wave knives around threatening tenants. Like, what a creep. Get a hobby, macrame or some shit. But I guess this guy had quite the rep for being an oddball and would frequent local donut shops to engage in heated conversations about murdering women. Like, fuck man, I'm trying to eat my bear claw and drink my coffee, leave me alone. But How to Get Away with Murder 101, do literally anything but that. But this dude was just kind of like a violent asshole, and not the kind after having really spicy food. And multiple women were coming forward saying that he'd threatened to flay their skin off their body with his hunting knife. Well, his ass ends up getting arrested on completely unrelated charges with a $1 million bail, and then the public assumes that the killer's been caught, like, yay! And now that this guy's locked up in the clink, it gives the police a chance to snoop around his apartment. They walk in and are like, what the fuck? This is not what we expected. It's like there were 2 sides to this dude. One half of the apartment was clean, tidy, dusted, scrubbed. You could eat sushi off the toilet seat. The other half was like on the show Hoarders. It was grungy, shit was broken, there was trash on the ground. The sides were polar opposites. It's like, even though only one person lived here, maybe the space was occupied by 2 different personalities. But despite the eeriness of the apartment, the cops really weren't able to find any evidence or anything that painted him as the Gainesville Ripper. The dude was just a little bit nuts. Aren't we all? Well, maybe not that kind of nuts. So for the next 3 weeks, the police dredged the lakes and the ponds, sifted through the streams, combed the woods and fields, still coming up empty-handed. At this point, the DNA analysis came back and semen was found on yet another body, which happened to be the same semen from the other 2 bodies, but none of them were a match with Edward. discovered. So they were back to square one again with nothing to tell the public. The killer was still out there ready once again to do his thing, and nobody was safe. This false hope that the public had been given that the killer was Eddie helped everyone sleep a little bit more soundly, so the police decide to keep the fact that Eddie wasn't the killer a total secret. Okay, that sounds like a great plan. But the police start back at square one, and investigators look at all the theories surrounding this case. Really, the only thing that stood out was a tip regarding a string of 3 murders that happened a full year earlier up in Shreveport, but the methods of killing were eerily similar. Julie was a young brunette college student with a size 2 waist who had been stabbed to death along with her father and her nephew, and nobody really would have thought to connect these except that Julie was staged just like the Gainesville victims. She had been bound with duct tape, stabbed, and the area around her had been totally clean to remove any DNA. Except with the Shreveport killings, the Louisiana police actually had a suspect. And this dude had been on the run for quite a while, and he'd kind of been a troubled kid, living a life of crime, robbing banks, trying to be a regular gangster. So the Gainesville police finger through the old files to look for any word of armed robbery around the time of the students' murders. And what the flying fat ass do you think they found? Why, right there in black and white is some dirt regarding a holdup at the First Union Bank near Krista Hoyt's apartment the morning before her body was found. Oh my, can we get a suspicious shot for that? Uh-oh, she's running low. Cops had even chased this man into the woods after the holdup, but the guy got away. No worries though, because a week later, the dumbass decides to hold up both a grocery store and a bank 40 miles from Gainesville. The robber was now sitting pretty in jail, and what was this pitiful peddle's name? Why, Danny Rolling. The cops end up taping off the woods that Danny ran into in Gainesville and find a little man-made bunker. It's like he would go rob the bank, then roast some marshmallows under the moonlight while camping. But Danny should have been named Joe because this bitch was sloppy. His little campsite was simply crawling with evidence. In fact, he even had a ski mask there that matched the fibers found on a little tiny piece of duct tape that was left behind on the 3rd Gainesville murder. He also left pants that had tiny speckles of blood as well as hair from Krista inside of his own sleeping bag. And if that's not enough to charge this guy, there was an audio tape of him basically saying he'd have to run for the rest of his life, but that he was getting good at it. This campsite was the literal meaning of a dead giveaway. There was also a screwdriver at the campsite, which they knew wasn't the murder weapon, but that might be how the killer broke into the apartments. And lucky for detectives, each screwdriver leaves a different marking, kind of like a tool's fingerprint, so they compared its patterns to the markings left on the doors at all 3 apartments. And what do you know? All the marking lines match up perfectly with each other, which kind of shocked the police because they had never even suspected that a screwdriver was involved in this shit. But who the hell even was this Danny guy? Well, he was born in 1954 in Shreveport, right where the first killings had been. His dad was a police officer who made it very clear as often as he could that Danny was an unwanted accident. Well, he sounds like a gaping asshole. I guess the dad would regularly abuse Danny, his brother, and his mom for the stupidest random things. Like if any of them were breathing too loudly or at a weird pace, they'd get a punch to the head. And Danny's mom even had to be hospitalized because his father made her cut herself with a razor blade. And after several failed attempts to leave him, she'd always end up right back in the same bullshit. He was just a mean fucking man. Like he would handcuff Danny and have him taken off by fellow cops because he was too embarrassed by his son. Like, don't fucking have kids if you're gonna be a shit stain to them. Damn. Seems like there's terrible parenting in a lot of these stories, like our last one with Josh Powell. Like, really? Fuck. But after Danny had been fake arrested and was brought back, the dad had beat his dog so badly that it died in Danny's arms. Like, what the fuck? I can deal with the human aspect of this, but anytime an animal is brought in, my heartstrings just can't take it. Well, as anyone who doesn't have a concrete block for a brain could imagine, all of this really impacted Danny's later life. He was arrested more times than I have fingers and toes for robberies in Georgia, and was even caught spying on women who were undressing, which, again, very similar to our last story. Anywho, when Danny grew up, he just didn't seem to fit in anywhere into society, no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't keep a job, he couldn't make friends, and couldn't be trusted farther than I can throw a car. And now, years later, all of this evidence was painting Danny as a killer. So an investigator goes to pay Danny a visit and requests 5 pieces of hair to sample, which wouldn't be so hard because the guy did seem quite nice. Danny was like, fine, sure, whatever, and then suddenly his Mr. Nice Guy demeanor completely flipped. He pulled down his pants in front of the investigator lady and started grabbing handfuls of hair from all over his body to give to her. She was in shock because it's almost like this dude was becoming the Hulk. He'd been perfectly normal seeming, but after he pulled out his hair, his chest was puffing, he was breathing heavily. It's like he was a tiny-dicked bird trying to show dominance. She's like, yeah, that's like 1,000 hairs, I only needed 5. But thanks, I guess, for the peep show. I'll go knit a beanie with the rest of this. But this dude was like an angry little chameleon that was changing colors in front of her. He'd gone from a nice, meek little kitten to the big bad wolf in a matter of seconds. Can we take a moment for a psycho shot? Oh. The DNA from the hair finally comes back, and of course it matched the DNA from the crime scenes. But remember, this was almost 30 years ago when the industry wasn't as confident in DNA as it is today, so it might not sway a jury. The only way they could really guarantee that it was him was if he admitted to the killings, and the only way that would happen is if the investigators got inside of his mind. So they studied the Charles Manson cases, they even studied the movie The Exorcist, looking at the battle between good and evil. It seemed as though Danny was separating what he'd done using religion. Like by day, he was a good little church boy, and then when the sun would set, something dangerous and irresistible would take over him and he'd have to give into it. Then in the morning, he'd wake up to the damage he'd done that night and would be so full of guilt. He described it as a different dimension, one that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, a war on some parallel world that nobody but he could see. And this war was between devils and angels, and he was just a pawn, unknowingly carrying out the devil's wishes. Okay, sir, somebody's off their rocker. And to act like this tough guy behind bars, Danny had been talking in prison about how he is the superstar of crimes, like there was nobody better than him. Honestly, please, like he certainly wasn't part of amateur hour, but everyone knows that you don't talk about your murders with anyone. And here he was basically doing the cell block tango from Chicago, telling everyone what he'd done. And Danny at this point had been sent to a mental health clinic and had apparently chummed up with a guy named Bobby, who happened to be the only person ever to have broken out of death row. And Bobby was kind of famous around prison. He could hook you up with anything you needed. You need a line or two of the white stuff, he's got it. You need a few mason jars to cook that hooch, well, you tell him when and where. But he was also guilty of a lot of shit and wanted to reduce his own sentence. And the relationship between these two guys was intense. I don't know that it was ever like sexual, but Danny kind of loved this guy. It was like he was his best friend. And it was definitely a you scratch my ass, I'll scratch yours kind of sitch. Danny's like, the cops are bound to find out what I did. How about I confess to you and you tell the police to try to get some kind of leniency? In fact, I will only talk to you and you can be my mediator. So he and Danny made a deal with the police and everything starts falling into place. Bobby said that he'd interviewed Danny for hundreds of hours and that Danny admitted that the devil told him he needed to kill 8 people for every year he'd spent in prison. Bobby also began penning letters to journalists to sell Danny's story behind his back, which later he did say wasn't his proudest moment. Definitely not a cute look. However, one of these journalists, whose claim to fame was writing a best-selling book about her serial killer ex, kind of took a liking to Danny. And I'm not one to call out relationship traits, but Mama seemed to love the killers. You'd think there'd be a better quality to look for, like do better, sweetie, but we're not judging. Just kidding, we're all judging. But this woman actually ended up getting to know Danny very well and wrote a book about him. Shocker. And she didn't stop there, no madam, they were actually engaged and in love. A relationship Danny said was as deep as the Amazon River and just as wild. That just goes to show, folks, if he can get somebody, we can all find someone. But to make a long fucking story short, they end up hugely profiting from the book, but all of that money was seized from Danny because convicts aren't allowed to profit off of their stories while incarcerated. Danny does end up admitting to the police that with Christina and Sonia, he broke in so quietly that the girls didn't even wake up. So he explored the upstairs before putting duct tape over Sonia's mouth while she was sleeping, then stabbed her several times after she woke up and saw him. He then crept downstairs where Christina was sleeping, taped her mouth shut as well, bound her hands behind her back, then taunted her with the knife he used to cut her clothes off. And then after assaulting her, he slammed her head to the floor and proceeded to stab her to death. And I guess it wasn't even necessarily the stab wounds that killed her, but it seemed that she may have made the stab wounds worse when she tried to fend him off. Then he positioned the bodies in sexual poses, which instantly became his trademark. The next day, Danny broke into Krista's apartment by prying the sliding glass door open with a screwdriver. She wasn't home, so he putzed around inside, waiting for her to get back, where he then surprised her from behind and put her in a chokehold till she was unconscious. How fucking scary, not just for Krista, but for all of them. Like, this is so stressful. But Krista had the same thing happen. She was gagged, she was bound, had her clothes ripped off, she was sexually assaulted, and then stabbed in her back, almost instantly killing her. Oh my god, then he flips her over like a fucking slice of deli meat and made one slice all the way from her chest down. But this time he didn't pose her. Instead, he fled back to his campsite. But when he got there, he was getting ready to order some Chinese takeout and couldn't for the life of him find his wallet. He was like, fuck, what if I left it at the crime scene? So he runs back, sees her body, and thinks, what the hell, let's position her. And he admitted that, just like what investigators thought, this wasn't for any other reason than to spook the cops and for his own entertainment. Like, what the hell? It's nothing to celebrate, but bitch, I need another shot. There are some sick fucks out there. At that point, news of his killings had spread and he was on like a killing high. The media was talking about him without them knowing it, and damn did that make his biscuits rise. So a few days later, he broke into Tracy and Manny's Danny's college apartment with his little screwdriver and killed Manny after a very brief struggle. All of this commotion woke Tracy up, who saw Danny, and she tried to barricade herself in her bathroom, but as we know, that didn't work. And again, Danny tied her up, cut her clothes off, assaulted her, then stabbed her 3 times in the back. But this time, just to confuse the police, he left her body in the position where she died. And this was almost exactly a year after he had randomly attacked those innocent 3 people in Shreveport. They'd literally been standing in their home cooking dinner when Danny broke in, killed them, mutilated their bodies, cleaned up the area, and then posed them. And really, the only way the cops were led to the murders was because a husband and a wife from Danny's church took Danny in, and I guess he had said some pretty disturbing things to them. When she saw the Gainesville murders happening, the wife called the Shreveport Crime Stoppers and suggested that the police investigate Danny. And because of her phone call, they were able to make the connection. And from there, they just pieced everything together. And the rest is history. He'd killed 8 people in the course of 1 year and was sentenced to death to be carried out in 2006. And he eventually was killed after a meal of lobsters and Bible hymns were sung. Danny was just a fucked up little shit, but he did leave a dark legacy. He inspired movies and killer characters in video games. There's so many books and articles written about him, and not just from a murderous standpoint, but from a psychological view. He was just an absolutely awful person, and it's sad and fucked up that this even happened. Like, once again, we have a person who is abused by adult figures and ended up a killer. I'm not saying all kids who are abused will kill, but just remember that everything you do and say can impact them. Which is why I personally stay around a kid just long enough to teach them 1, maybe 2 good swear words and let the parents do the rest of the damage. Well, folks, there you go. Yeah, not a happy ending at all. Please let me know down in the comments below if there's any case that you want me to cover. I'm always happy to look into them. And thank you so much for being here. I love having you. And you know what? If you want a little bit more me in your life, please head over to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/poplux. You get videos a day early, you get Patreon-only content, and best part, it is cheap, fun, and fancy, just like me. And like always, please be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell down below so that you're notified anytime I upload a new video. Don't forget my newest collection of highlighters, including Black Ice, which does change from black to white, will be available again soon at thepoplux.com. Also, my latest album, Kiss of Fame, is available everywhere online that music is sold. Thank you so much to everyone who's supporting them. Comment down below, let me know what you thought of this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter at officialnady, and you can follow me online at thepoplux.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all, and I will see you again soon. Bye!